military chart room of the German General Staff has become the Hitler Death Watch. Patton, Bradley, and Zukov are doing more than revealing the weakness of the German army. They are uncovering the evidence of the greatest crime in history. Louder than the roar of Europe's cannon tonight is the mute testimony of 20 million skeletons who would still be men except for Adolf Hitler. And so I remain your New York correspondent, Walter Winchell, who believes that any American, and that anyone who feels we should think twice before punishing the Germans, should think once of the millions of women and children the Germans have starved and mutilated.
The Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center here in Skokie is a remarkable new structure. It's dedicated to preserving the memories of the many lives that were lost in the Holocaust. This museum is also being used to educate current and future generations about the need to combat hatred, prejudice, and indifference. I'm Paul Lisnek, and in the next half hour, you're going to hear the moving stories of two Holocaust survivors, and we'll give you a close look inside this very special site of remembrance. Nothing brings the horror, the terror, the pain of the Holocaust to life more so than the stories of those who lived through this worst of human atrocities. 12 million people did not survive the Nazi death camps, never making it over bridges like this to take them on ships to America. And those who did went decades without being able to speak a word of what they had lived through. And so now we meet Fritzi Fritzl and Sam Harris. She survived the death camp at Auschwitz. He made it out alive from Czestochowa. Now, seeing is believing, but hearing their incredible accounts from those who actually lived through this hell on earth, nothing is more powerful. Here are the stories of Fritzi and Sam. It's been many, many years, and for many years, people wouldn't tell their stories. Sam, I'll begin with you, author of the book, Sammy, Child Survivor of the Holocaust. Did you go through a long period of time where you couldn't tell your story or wouldn't?
Paul, I didn't want to. I came here when I was 12 years old after going through the whole Holocaust, and I was adopted in Northbrook. Couldn't speak English. You know, I just wanted to be one of the kids. I want to play baseball. I want to do. So even my adoptive parents I didn't talk to. Yeah, I cried at night when I was sleeping. My mother sat at my bed. We cried together, but I never talked about it through grade school, through high school, through college, and through the business world.
Did people even know that you were a survivor?
And not really, because I just had my 50th reunion from New Jersey. And there was, my picture was in the Tribune. We were collecting artifacts, and they said, "Wow, Sam, I feel terrible. I know you so well, you know." So they didn't know. And then they all started going out for lunch with me. They wanted to know more about it.
And we want to know the story. And I know we can read the book, Sammy's Child Survivor of the Holocaust, but Sam, you were born in 1935.
Yes.
And tell us your story.
I was 4 years old when we were sitting and having lunch. We heard noises outside. We went outside, and there were airplanes shooting at each other. As a little kid, that sounded good. Then pretty soon I saw the airplanes going down in flames. You see, my town of Dęblin, Poland, which is near Warsaw, it had an Air Force. That's where the Polish Air Force got its training, so they came there first. And then pretty soon the Nazis came down, and I remember running on fields, and the Nazis started shooting at the people, and I was introduced to pain and death right then and there. Next thing I know, the Nazis come into our house, they drag my father out, they break sticks, so they start beating him. My brother's hiding in the woods, he sees it all happening, carries him home, and I remember my father laying there with flesh ripped apart. That was just the beginning.
And what did your father do for a living? Did they think he was a spy?
My father, no, he was a sofer. He wrote the Torah. He had a big white quill, and he sat day and night writing the Torah. He was very visible.
And eventually you found your way, your family found its way to a camp. Which camp? You were in two. Which was your first camp?
The first one was Demblin. When first the Nazis came, they had an Ausdurlung, which means they came in and they lined the Jews up, and they went into cattle cars to Treblinka or Sobibor. I was in that same line, and my father pushed me out of the line. He says, "Go over there. There's some brick site over there. Hide behind those bricks." And I ran there, I heard shooting behind me. I don't think they were shooting at me, I don't know. There was shooting going on all along while the people were lined up in the town square. I saw those lines pretty soon starting to walk in the direction of the cattle cars. And in my mind, they're still marching in that direction. It's the last I saw my parents, my sisters, my brothers. I'm the youngest of 7, only 2 sisters surviving. And they all went into those cattle cars, and neighbors and friends and everything.
And eventually you left that camp, and you yourself ended up on one of those cars.
The Russians came close, and so they needed, the Nazis needed, they needed slaves in Częstochowa. There's a bullet factory. So they took all the Jews and they put them in the cattle cars. And I was in there too, and we ended up in Częstochowa concentration camp.
When I hear that story, Fritzie, you were in one of probably the most well-known camps, Auschwitz-Birkenau. I don't know why we know that one more than others. We do, that death camp. Tell us about your family, though, before you went. How did it begin for your family?
It began, actually, we knew when Hitler came into power. We lived in a country called, it was Czechoslovakia at the time. It is now under the Ukraine government. But we lived in freedom until, for many years while all this was going on in Germany. We knew. My grandparents lived close to the Polish border, and we used to visit. And so these Jews that were being persecuted in Germany used to cross the border, come and look for a Jewish home and ask for food and shelter. So we knew Jews were being persecuted, but we still lived in peace until I woke up one morning to go to school with a friend, my girlfriend, who slept in my house, in my bed. Walked into to school. She was allowed to go into class. A man teacher held his hand up to me and told me, Jews are not allowed to walk into class any longer. All the Jewish children in our community were sent home that morning. My mother waited for us, my 2 brothers and myself, and had to tell us the facts of life. We're now occupied by the German government. We now have to obey all of Hitler's rules and have to follow different orders. And this is how it really started for us.
When you were brought to the camps, we talked about this earlier, I asked you whether you had a number, because I've seen survivors, they show me their number. You didn't have a number on you. You learned why you didn't have a number.
The lady that's in charge of Auschwitz concentration camp, her name is Teresa. She explained this to me when I visited the camp. She said she knew exactly what barrack I was in. She knew exactly what transport I came on. And she said when our transport came, the camp was so full that everyone was to go into the gas chambers, directly into the gas chambers. And so somehow or other, I was one of the lucky ones and fell through the cracks.
So no number, because there was no need to catalog you, because you were set to die immediately.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I know in talking to a survivor who's a friend of mine, she said, Paul, no matter how bad you think it was, picture the worst of the worst in your mind. It was 4,000 times worse than that.
There's just no way to describe it. There's just no way. How do you describe hunger to someone that's sitting with a full stomach? People think it's dieting or skipping breakfast or skipping lunch. And how do you explain hunger where the pit of your stomach is so sore that you would sell your soul for a potato? How do you explain living with death day in and day out? How do you explain living with Dr. Mengele, where you had to walk through, get undressed, and walk in this line, and there's this selection. One row goes this way, one row goes this way. One row goes directly to the gas chambers, one row goes back into the barracks. You don't know which row you're in. You don't know if you're in the good row or the bad row. How do you explain waking up in the morning, the person on one side or the other side of you is dead? You have to pick them up with someone's help and bring them and put them in front of the barracks to be counted. It's called appel. How do you explain watching all your friends dying in front of you? How do you explain the lookout posts, the dogs? I can tell you what a dog can do. I avoided dogs for years and years. There's no way to explain Auschwitz. If I sat here from today till tomorrow, I couldn't explain it.
I've been to Auschwitz, I've seen it, it's astounding to see. And I mentioned to Sam earlier, I looked and I thought it would be grand, that is to say, huge gates and huge, and it's not. It looked like if you were there, just get out, jump a fence, go.
Auschwitz is not as small as you think. Auschwitz is divided into many camps. There's the men's camp, there's Auschwitz-Birkenau, there was Buna, there was divided. If you were in Auschwitz and you went up on one of those lookout posts, they still have, your eye couldn't take in all the areas that is part of Auschwitz concentration camp.
Much of it is gone now.
It is huge. Much of it is gone now. Some of the barracks have been torn down. It's become a museum. But you know, the fence is still there. The barbed wires are still there. What you need to understand when you say about escape, there was no escape. You went as far as the ditch before the barbed wires. If you came too close, they would shoot at you. The wires were so strong, the electricity was so strong that if you came near it, you could commit suicide. So oftentimes in the morning when we would wake up, the wires were full of bodies because people did commit suicide, but there was no escape from Auschwitz. It was impossible to escape. We had to stand at appel twice a day in front of each barrack. They would line us up, and we stand at appel to be counted. If one person was missing, we had to stand for hours and hours and hours at appel. If it rained, if it snowed, if it was hot, if it was cold, we just stood there with rags on our feet and blankets, possibly if somebody had a blanket. We were in rags in the winter and just stood until that person was found.
I went into one area where there were a row of toilets, just a series of row of holes. And when I looked, I thought, well, not a lot of privacy in that situation. I didn't know the half of it.
But you know, our dignity was taken away from us in the boxcars originally. When they put us into the boxcars didn't have a bathroom. It didn't have a toilet. We had to use a bucket that was put in the center of this boxcar. There were 200, 300, sometimes 400 people in one of these boxcars we have here in our museum. If you walked into it, you're going to see, you can imagine all these crowds pushing against each other because there was no room. If you needed to use a bathroom, you used that bucket in front of everyone, and you used it or your kidneys would bust. So this is when our dignity was taken away first. So now you're coming to the toilets in Auschwitz, which are one very, very long room, one as long as this museum possibly, with just holes, one hole here, one hole here, one hole here, one hole here. You had to stand and wait your turn. You didn't have the luxury of sitting on this toilet. You were pushed and pulled off as fast as you got on there because we had this many minutes to use the toilet, this many minutes to walk away. And so there was no privacy. There was no dignity. Everything had been taken away from us at that point.
Sam, you were in the boxcar Fritzi's talking about. What do you remember? How long were you there?
I think I was there about 3 days. It was completely packed. No food, no toilets. People were yelling and screaming. And I've described it in a way that I felt like I was in the belly of a monster. I was still, you know, at that point, I was about 8.5 years old when I was in the boxcar.
Can I tell you about the boxcar?
Sure.
The boxcar is the hardest thing for me to talk about. When we were taken away and put onto this boxcar, there was very little room, so they pushed us in, okay, and the doors locked. My memory of the boxcar, I wasn't as young as Sam, I was 13, and so the boxcar to me was the first where I saw death in that way. We had babies that suffocated in that boxcar that mothers held on to. We had babies that died from hunger, from lack of water. We had people that were fainting because we were so pressed in together in this boxcar. We had to hold those people up because we couldn't put them down because the boxcar was so full. By the time we came to Auschwitz, more than half of the people in our compartment were dead, most of the babies, pregnant women. My grandfather was one of the people that died in this boxcar going to Auschwitz. So my memory of this boxcar is horrendous.
Babies were being smothered, and I wondered whether some mothers were smothering their baby to ensure they wouldn't go forward for what they thought lied ahead. Did you know what was ahead of you?
We didn't know. When we were put into this boxcar, we were told we were going to be relocated. We knew about the final solution, but we didn't know what the final solution was. So we didn't know we were being taken to Auschwitz. We had never heard of Auschwitz till we came to Auschwitz. So did the mothers smother their babies because they knew where they were going? No, we did not know where we were going. Once that lock went on the boxcar from the outside, is the first we knew wherever we were going to be taken to was not going to be good.
Sam, in your life there, your father saved you, really, from what you're saying. Do you think he knew? I mean, I'm speculating, but do you think he knew what was ahead?
I think my father probably knew what was going on, but did he know of Treblinka where he ended up? Probably not. I'm just taking a guess. Probably not.
When did you get closure? When did you learn the fates of your family?
Probably an hour or two after it came to Auschwitz. My mother and I were separated, and when I asked when I would see my mother, they showed me the smoke. So I knew right away after coming to Auschwitz of what was happening.
Auschwitz-Birkenau is still there, as we said. Some is gone. Actually, my understanding is some of the barracks were burned by the Nazis. They didn't want to be found at that time, but history lesson aside, I walked into the shower area, and still on the walls, as will be there forever, the scratch marks. Clearly the scratch marks of people trying to get out, trying to panic. I can't imagine, except you stand there in silence. Should this be torn down? Why should this pain be remembered forever?
Why are we building Holocaust museums in the United States? Why is Yad Vashem built? Why do we have a Holocaust museum in Washington? Why did we build this museum? The importance of what happened yesterday shouldn't happen tomorrow. It is memory. It is our memory today, but it is for your children and your grandchildren. If we don't remember and we don't teach and we don't build, the world is never going to be right. The world will never know. We need to learn from the past so it doesn't happen tomorrow.
Survivors today are in their 70s, their 80s, their 90s. People who come to the museum get to meet you, don't they? I mean, from time to time, you are here to tell your story. Nobody should miss that. It's important your story remain, and I thank you for spending some time with me. Sam, Fritzi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
God bless you. The story of the Holocaust is memorialized and kept alive through books, through movies, and through the stories of its survivors. But time passes, and soon there will be no survivors left to tell, to confirm. The best way to ensure that the darkest chapter of human history is never forgotten is to memorialize it through this living museum. It's an ongoing memorial to those whose memory we wish to preserve and honor. J.B. Pritzker was a driving force to ensure that the funds were raised to build this museum in the heart of Skokie, where so many Holocaust survivors settled after the war. The development, the care, and the telling of that story is in the capable hands of the museum's executive director, Richard Hirschhout. How does steel and stone and glass which surround us relate the horrors, the cries of the 6 million, really 12 million people who died in the Holocaust? How do you get that across?
Well, this is a very strong building, very architecturally striking, and very industrial in its design. You enter from the darkened wing, the darker of the two buildings, and you come into an area of exposed steel, exposed concrete block, exposed ductwork, all to suggest the industrialization of mass murder and to lead you through a darkened path with no natural light ultimately bringing you into a lighter side of the institution, the white building, which begins to introduce light, which suggests the triumph over this evil and the illumination that hopefully comes from having had this encounter with this terrible history.
JB, this was a $45 billion project, 65,000 square feet, truly overloaded with metaphors. You were the campaign chair, and one of the things you said, what got you moved to do this, was you said you were moved by the survivors' utter unwillingness to disbelieve this museum would get built.
Indeed, their commitment and their passion is what got this built. We have tremendous following of supporters for this museum who were caught up in that passion, and many wrote checks to do it. Many have volunteered to be a part of it, and so we've been very, very fortunate. But it is the survivors and their idea. You know, more than 25 years ago, the survivors, in the wake of the attempted neo-Nazi march in Skokie, got together to create the organization that underlies this museum, the Holocaust Memorial Foundation of Illinois. And they got together and decided that they needed to educate, particularly young people, about the Holocaust, that if the neo-Nazis weren't thought to be inappropriate to march in Skokie, then people must have forgotten, they said, what the swastika stood for. And then, about 10 years ago, they approached me and asked me if I would be involved in a major project to build a Holocaust museum. And I'm very fortunate to have been approached to do it. And it's been a labor of love, but mostly because their passion and their commitment is, it's all consuming. And I got caught up in it.
You know, there are museums in Washington, D.C., and New York, and Los Angeles, and other places. Why Illinois? Why Skokie?
President Clinton said it so beautifully at our opening. It's a story that must resonate and be shared in America's heartland, here in the Midwest.
We don't want the only people remembering and learning to be in Washington, New York, and Los Angeles. The heartland of America needs to know the same thing.
When you see the different exhibits and pieces that are here, the Room of Remembrance is a very powerful component. Interestingly about it is the fact that every name listed on that wall is tied to somebody who lives in the area. Talk to me about your feeling, I mean, having raised the money for it, but nevertheless, being in that space and walking through, JB, how do you feel about it?
Well, remember, this Holocaust Museum grew out of the hope and dream of the survivors themselves. So they're the ones who created the Room of Remembrance themselves. They're the ones who created the Book of Remembrance, which sits within that room, that has the names of their relatives who were victims of the Holocaust. And so the conception of that came from the survivors. So when they go into that room and they look at the first names that are represented on that wall in a curved fashion all the way up several stories, what they see is a memorial, it is for them the final resting place in many ways of their departed relatives who were victims of the Nazis. They see in that a place that they can find the final resting place and be comforted by the idea that their relatives are remembered.
Elie Wiesel said, here was a place, referring to Auschwitz, where people came to die, others came to kill, and it worked. The system worked. We walk through the museum and we see the remnants, the artifacts of that time. Why is there so much power in a belt, in a shoe, which there is?
Well, the artifacts themselves animate the lives that once used and enjoyed and participated in life itself with these items. And they become powerful and poignant in their own right. Our challenge in telling the story in this museum is to personalize and individualize as much as we can what otherwise is an incomprehensible number: 6 million Jewish victims and 5 million more victims of other backgrounds, So if the visitor can understand that these were 11 million individual victims who had lives, who had families, who sat around and shared a meal at a common table, whether it was a Sabbath table or a regular family dinner table, who participated in sports and culture and theater, it makes the enormity of the loss much more comprehensible and much greater and much more piercing and deep.
As I've said, I've seen other Holocaust museums, and the message of most of them is never forget, never forget. The message here goes beyond that, and perhaps in no more stronger place in this museum is that message put out there than in the children's area of this museum. Talk to me about the children's area and the experience that kids have when they come in, because it is not doom and gloom.
From the beginning to the end of the process of creation of this museum, we have tried to determine and then issue forth what we believe to be the universal lessons of the Holocaust. They're the lessons that tell us that we have to stand up to bigotry and hatred, that if you're a bystander and you let these things happen, you're as good as a collaborator, as bad as a collaborator. So in the children's portion of this museum and throughout everything else in the museum, those universal lessons, we hope, come through to people.
And you learn a lot as you walk through. You see it all. Nothing as powerful, again, as the statements of survivors, their stories. And for many years, a lot of these survivors would never talk of their experience. It seems, as you've met them, it seems that now they understand the importance of telling a story they once couldn't tell.
And you asked about why Skokie for this museum. And it's because Skokie, the very word, the village, but the very word, is about what sparked many Holocaust survivors to tell their stories. That it was the attempted neo-Nazi march that had many saying to themselves and to others, we must teach about what happened because people have forgotten. It is about never again, but we also remind people it has happened again, and it may again happen if we don't keep drilling it, keep telling people, make sure that the young people who come through this museum learn the lessons.
This is the fountain of the righteous. These are the names of non-Jews who at great personal risk hid children and families of Jewish people from the Nazis and from the death camps. They did it at great risk to themselves because had they been caught, they would have been killed as well. But they did it because it was right. The Holocaust Museum and Education Center here in Skokie carries a powerful message that we must never forget what has happened in the past, and we must ensure that it never happens in the future by teaching the children what is right. It still goes on around the world, but perhaps one day we can remember the past to transform the future. I'm Paul Lisnick, and thank you for joining us.